Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel Risk Modeling Hub. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here today because today we will be diving deep into one of the most critical topics in credit risk interviews, IFRS 9. If you are preparing for a role in banking, fintech or risk management, this is non-negotiable knowledge. Trust me, roughly 70% of credit risk interview questions revolve around IFRS 9 and its expected credit loss model. So, by the end of this video, you will be way ahead of your competition. Now, let me set the context for you. IFRS 9 is the International Financial Reporting Standard for financial instruments. It fundamentally changed how banks recognize and measure the credit losses. But here's the thing that makes it so important for your interview preparation. It's not just about knowing what IFRS 9 is, it's about understanding why it was introduced, how it works, and most importantly, being able to articulate this knowledge confidently when you are sitting across from a senior risk manager during interview. What you are about to learn covers three major areas: the expected credit loss model, the three-stage staging approach, and the key components like probability of default, loss given default, and exposure at default. We are also going to cover the critical difference between the IFRS 9 and its predecessor, IAS 39, because this comparison comes up constantly in interviews. I have structured this entire module to walk you through each concept progressively, so by the end, you will not just understand the IFRS 9, you will be able to explain it in a way that demonstrates genuine expertise. The reason this matters so much is simple. IFRS 9 represents a paradigm shift from how credit losses were measured before. It moves away from a backward looking approach to a forward looking one. That shift changed the entire landscape of credit risk management in the financial industry. So let's get started, and I promise by the end of this, you will have the confidence to tackle any IFRS 9 question that comes your way. So, to truly understand why IFRS 9 matters, we need to go back to 2008, the global financial crisis. That wasn't just an economic event, it explored massive flaws in how banks were accounting for credit risk. So, let me explain what went wrong and why regulators had to completely rethink the system. Under the old IAS 39 standard, banks used something called an incurred loss model. I know it sounds technical, but here's what it actually meant. Banks only recognized losses after there was an objective evidence that a default had occurred. In other words, they were waiting for the patient to die before recognizing the illness. This caused what regulators called cliff effects. So, picture this scenario: a bank had a seemingly healthy loan portfolio for years. Everything looked great, no provisions, strong capital ratios. And then suddenly, when the crisis hit and default started happening, banks had to write off massive amounts all at once. The market lost confidence overnight. Investors saw banks go from reporting healthy portfolios to sudden massive losses. It was catastrophic for trust. The numbers tell the story. So, we are talking about the $700 billion in the bank losses during the crisis, partly because the accounting system wasn't capturing the deteriorating credit quality until it was too late. Additionally, loan loss provisions jumped by 20 to 40% in the post crisis period because the banks were frantically trying to catch up with reality. The system had failed to provide early warning signals to investors and regulators alike. IFRS 9 was introduced as the solution. It fundamentally shifts from an incurred loss model to a forward looking expected loss model. And instead of waiting for objective evidence of default, banks now need to recognize expected losses from day one, incorporating past events, current conditions, and forward looking macroeconomic scenarios. This means you are essentially trying to predict losses before they happen and not after. So let me break down the four core issues that IFRS 9 resolved. So, first, it addresses the delayed loss recognition problem. Under IAS 39, you would only recognize losses when there was clear evidence of default. IFRS 9 says no, you estimated losses on day 1 based on probability of default scenarios. Second, it solves the cliff effect issue. So, here, instead of sudden write offs, you are smoothing the loss recognition over time as credit quality changes. Third, it aligns the accounting with risk management. Banks don't wait for defaults to manage the credit risk. They are constantly monitoring and adjusting. IFRS 9 makes accounting match that reality. And fourth, it provides hedge accounting that's more economically intuitive. Under IAS 39, hedge accounting was restrictive and complex. IFRS 9 simplified it. Here's what you need to remember for your interview. When an interviewer asks why IFRS 9 was introduced, don't just say because of the 2008 crisis. Explain specifically what was broken. Talk about how IAS 39's incurred loss model created a significant lag between when credit quality deteriorated and when losses were recognized. Mention the cliff effects as well. Connect it to practical impact, sudden write offs that shocked the markets and destroyed the investor confidence, and then pivot to how IFRS 9 fixes this with forward looking provisioning. This shows you don't just know the facts, you understand the reasoning behind them. Now let's talk about who brought IFRS 9 to life. The International Accounting Standard Board, or IASB. This is important context because it helps you understand the credibility and scope of the standard. The IASB is an independent private sector body that develops and approves the international financial reporting standards. They are the gold standard for global accounting rules. When the IASB makes a decision, it affects financial reporting across the world. Banks operating internationally have to comply with IFRS standards because they are widely used by over 140 countries and they are particularly critical for banking regulation. The IASB's mission with IFRS 9 was very clear: develop a principle based standard for financial instrument reporting that addresses the incurred loss model problems exposed by the financial crisis and do it in a way that makes sense for modern credit risk management. So it's not just about changing the accounting, it's about creating a standard that reflects how financial institutions actually manage risk. So let me walk you through the development timeline because this is actually tested in interviews more often than you would think. The project was divided into three main phases, and this phased approach is critical to understanding how IFRS 9 evolved. Phase 1: the classification and measurement in November 2009. The IASB started by rethinking how financial assets should be classified and measured. This is established the foundational framework for categorizing the debt securities, loans, and other instruments based on cash flow characteristics and business models. Phase 2: the impairment and derecognition in October 2010. This is where the expected credit loss model was introduced. The IASB added requirements for financial liabilities and the derecognition rules. This was the revolutionary moment where they shifted from incurred losses to expected losses. Phase 3: the hedge accounting in November 2013. The final piece was hedge accounting, which aligned accounting treatment with actual risk management practices. This made hedge accounting much more flexible and intuitive. The complete standard became effective on January 1, 2018. So let me emphasize that 2018 because this is relatively recent. What this means for you is that a lot of professionals in the industry are still getting used to it. which means your expertise in IFRS 9 is incredibly valuable. It's not legacy knowledge, it's cutting edge. And here's why this matters for your interview. So, when someone asks who introduced IFRS 9, so there they are really testing whether you understand the regulatory landscape and the authority behind the standard. You should know that it comes from the IASB, which is independent and globally recognized. You should understand that the phased approach wasn't random, it was deliberate. So, phase 1, establish the classification rules. Phase 2, introduce the ECL model that everyone talks about. And the phase 3, it made sure hedge accounting made practical sense. So, if you can explain this progression, you demonstrate that you understand not just what IFRS 9 is, but how it was built and why each component matters. Now, let's understand why IFRS 9 matters for credit risk roles. This slide is about something very practical for you, understanding why IFRS 9 expertise directly translates to career advancement in credit risk roles. So, if you are considering a move into banking, fintech, or risk management, IFRS 9 is your differentiator. Let me give you the stark numbers. Over 70% of credit risk interview questions touches upon the IFRS 9 in some way. Not directly asking that define IFRS 9, but they are testing your knowledge through scenario questions, calculation problems, and comparison questions. So, if you walk into an interview without solid IFRS 9 knowledge, you are at massive disadvantage. Additionally, 85% of the banks now actively use ECL models for their credit impairment calculations. And that's not optional, it's a standard practice. So, what are the core skills that IFRS 9 helps you develop? Let me break this down because these are the exact competencies that hiring managers are looking for. First is PDLGD framework. These three components form the backbone of any credit risk model. Probability of default measures how likely a borrower is to default. Loss given default measures how much you lose if they do default. And exposure at default measures how much you are exposed at the moment of default. So, if you can articulate these fluently, including their mathematical relationships and practical implications, you are already proven 30% of what senior risk managers care about. Second is all about scenario weighting and multi scenario analysis. This is where real expertise shines. IFRS 9 requires you to consider multiple economic scenarios, base case, upside, and downside, and weigh them probabilistically. This is the skill that separates junior analysts from senior modelers. So, when you can explain why scenario weighting matters and how macroeconomic forecasts feed into the ECL models, you are speaking the language of a seasoned risk professional. Third is discounting methodology and effective interest rate. Here's some here's something that many candidates miss. ECL isn't just a raw calculation. You need to discount expected future cash flows back to the measurement date using the effective interest rate. This requires understanding the time value of money and how interest rate mechanics works in the financial instruments. So it is technical, but when you get it right in an interview, it signals deep understanding. Last is the staging logic and the SICR detection with PIT versus TTC clarity. So SICR stands for significant increase in credit risk, and this is the mechanism that moves loans between the stages. Understanding staging, particularly what triggers a stage 1 to stage 2 migration, is absolutely critical because it directly affects how much provision you need to hold. Now, let me talk about which sectors and roles value these expertise. So, obviously, banks need this everywhere: credit risk, capital management, financial control, treasury, and lending operations. But increasingly, fintech companies are building their own credit risk infrastructure. So they need ECL expertise too. Consulting firms advise banks on IFRS 9 implementation. So management consultants benefit enormously from this knowledge. And insurance companies, credit rating agencies, and even private equity firms that originate credit need people who understand IFRS 9. So here's the career edge part. When you can discuss IFRS 9 not as a memorized definition, but as a framework for thinking about credit risk, you signal that you can translate complex regulatory requirements into practical business logic, build sophisticated models that incorporate multiple scenarios and forward looking information, communicate risk concepts to both technical and non technical stakeholders, think probabilistically about uncertain future outcomes. These are the exact competencies that lead to promotions and better opportunities in the company. So, for your interview preparation, here's what you should be prepared to discuss: the sector application. How IFRS 9 matters differently for retail banking versus corporate lending versus fintech. Understand that a retail credit card portfolio requires different ECL models than a corporate loan book. Know the practical challenges: data availability, macroeconomic forecasting, model validation, and governance. These are the conversations risk managers are having every day. So now we are getting to the core of the IFRS 9, the expected credit loss model or ECL. This is the concept that everything else builds upon. So if you truly understand ECL, you have unlocked about 60% of the IFRS 9 expertise. Let me start with the definition because precision matters here. ECL is a probability weighted estimate of cash shortfalls. Let me break that down word by word because each part is important. Please focus. Probability weighted. This means we are not taking a single scenario. We are considering multiple possible futures. A base case where the borrower performs normally, an upside scenario where they perform better than expected, and a downside scenario where they face stress. Each scenario gets a probability weight, and the weights have to sum to 100% because we are covering all possible outcomes. Estimate. This is an estimate because you are not predicting with certainty. We are making an informed projection based on historical data, current conditions, and forward looking informations. This is cash shortfall because ECL is fundamentally about the money that you won't get. It's the difference between the contractual cash flows promised under the loan agreement and the cash flows you actually expect to receive. So, the key insight is that that distinguishes ECL from traditional provisioning is that it is forward looking. Under the old system, you would wait for a borrower to miss a payment and then provision it. But with ECL, on day one, you are saying, given what I know today about this borrower, the macroeconomic environment, and the historical default patterns, what's the probability this loan will result in a loss? So, this requires you to think about the future in a structured and a probabilistic way. Now, let's talk about what ECL actually captures. It considers past events. Historical data tells you how often borrowers like this have defaulted in the past. It incorporates the current conditions. What is the economic environment today? Are we in a recession, expansion, or uncertain period? And it absolutely requires the forward looking scenarios. What do macroeconomic forecasters think that will happen over the next 12 months or 5 years? And so here's a critical discussion that comes up in the interviews constantly: 12-month ECL versus the lifetime ECL. So, for a stage 1 loan, one where credit risk hasn't increased significantly, here you calculate 12-month ECL. And this is expected losses from default that could occur in next 12 months only. So it's a narrower measure. But for a stage 2 loan where credit risk has increased significantly, or a stage 3 loan where the asset is credit impaired, you calculate lifetime ACL. This is expected losses over the entire remaining life of the loan. It's much broader measure because you are acknowledging that credit quality has deteriorated and you need to reserve for potential losses over the full period of the loan exist. This staging mechanism is absolutely critical and we will go deep into the next slide. But for now, understand that which ECL calculation you use depends upon the stage of the loan, which depends on whether the credit risk has increased significantly since initial recognition or not. So the practical impact is huge. Let's say a borrower might go from 12-month provision of $5,000 currently in stage 1 to a lifetime provision of say $50,000 in stage 2 because of a significant increase in credit risk. Same loan, same contract, but different provision because your assessment of future credit events has changed. Here's the key insight that will make you stand out in an interview. ECL is not just a prediction of actual losses, it's a statistical estimate based on a probability. Some loans in your portfolio will default more than the ECL predicts, others will default less. Over the full portfolio, ECL should calibrate reasonably well to actual losses. But for individual loans, especially in the short term, ECL and the actual losses won't match. That's expected and normal. Another critical point, ECL updates at every reporting date because the interest rate change, macroeconomic outlook shift, borrower credit quality can deteriorate or improve. So, your ECL model needs to be dynamic. They are not a one time calculation and you are continuously reassessing as new information arrives. So, think about this scenario. A manufacturing company borrows, let's say, $10 million at the beginning of 2024. On the origination date, based on their credit profile and economic conditions, your 12-month ECL might be $50,000. But then geopolitical tensions escalate, input costs spike, and suddenly the macroeconomic forecast deteriorates significantly. At the next reporting date, your 12-month ECL might jump up to $150,000 from $50,000. The loan hasn't defaulted, the borrower hasn't missed a payment, but your probabilistic assessment of future losses has changed. IFRS 9 requires you to reflect this in your accounts immediately. So, this forward looking aspect is actually what makes credit risk professionals valuable. Banks need people who can translate the economic forecast into credit risk implications. That's what ECL modeling is all about. So, alright, let's break down the mathematics of ECL because this is where many candidates stumble. But with the right explanation, it becomes incredibly intuitive. The formula is elegant in its simplicity. ECL is PD multiplied by LGD multiplied by EAD. But the power lies in understanding what each component means and why this multiplication makes sense. PD is probability of default. This is the likelihood that a borrower will fail to meet their contractual obligations within a specified time horizon. It's expressed as percentage. So if you have PD of 2%, that means there's a 2% probability that the borrower will default within your specified time horizon. For stage 1 loans, the horizon is 12 months. For stage 2 or 3, it's the lifetime of the instrument. So, where does that PD come from? This is crucial for interview discussions. PD comes from your historical default data. You look back at your loan portfolio and analyze of all the borrowers in the credit segment with these characteristics, what percentage actually defaulted. So you might find that over a 5-year period, 1.5% of small business loans defaulted. You would use that 1.5% as your PD estimate, adjusted for current conditions. This is the example. You would also leverage external data for this, rating agency studies and industry benchmarks. So, PD isn't just your internal data, it's informed by broader market evidence. Next is LGD, the loss given default. This is the percentage of exposure you lose if a default actually occurs. And let me illustrate this with an example. Suppose that you have $100,000 of secured loan to a business and the business defaults. So your legal team recovers, say, $70,000 through collateral liquidation and other recovery mechanism. Your loss is $30,000, and in this case, your LGD is 30%. LGD depends heavily on collateral, seniority, and recovery processes. A senior secured loan to a business with strong collateral might have an LGD of 20 to 30%. A junior unsecured loan to the same business might have an LGD of 70 to 80%. For real mortgages with strong real estate collateral, LGD might be 20 to 30%. For unsecured credit card debt, LGD could be 80 to 90%. Calculating LGD requires you to estimate recovery rates. You need to know how long does recovery typically take, what's the liquidation value of the collateral, what percentage of unsecured creditors typically recover. These are empirical questions that you answer through data analysis. Last comes the EAD, the exposure at default. This is how much you are exposed to when default occurs. It's the outstanding balance at the moment of default. So, for term loans, this is relatively straightforward. It's the remaining principal balance. But for revolving credit facilities, it's more complex. A borrower with $50,000 of credit card limit might have used only, let's say, $20,000 today. But that could potentially draw up to the full use of the limit by the time they default. So you need to estimate what they will draw, and this is called the credit conversion factor, the CCF. The multiplication makes intuitive sense. You are taking the probability something bad happens, multiplying by how bad if it does, and multiplying by how much you are exposed to, and the result is the expected loss. So let me walk through a simple example to cement this. Imagine Imagine that you are evaluating $100,000 of loans. For this, PD is 2%, LGD is 40%, which means that if they default, you would lose 40% of the amount. And EAD is the full amount exposure, the $100,000. Once you multiply it, you will get $800 as a ECL. So this $800 is your expected loss estimate on the single loan. On a portfolio of thousands of loans, you would sum up all the individual ECLs to get your total expected credit loss provision. But here's what makes the interviewers tricky. The formula itself is simple, but the real complexity lies in the components. How do you estimate the PD accurately? What adjustment do you make for current conditions versus through the cycle? How would you estimate LGD when you have limited default history? And how would you forecast EAD for the revolving facilities? And let me address one simple common misconception. The formula isn't linear in reality. Banks often adjust PD for point in time conditions. You might have a through the cycle PD of 1.5% based on long term history, but in recession, your point in time PD might spike up to 3 to 4%. And that is why scenario analysis is more important. You are not using a single PD, you are running this formula under multiple economic scenarios. weighing them and then averaging the results. So here's something important for your interviews. Be prepared to explain what happens when one component changes. If PD increases from 2% to 4%, then ECL doubles. If LGD increases because collateral value fall, ECL increases proportionally. And if EAD increases because a borrower draws more on a revolving facility, ECL increases. So, you need to be able to articulate the sensitivity, understand which components have the biggest impact on your overall loss estimates, and also be ready to discuss the discounting factor. The formula that I showed here gives you undiscounted ECL, but IFRS 9 requires you to discount the expected cash shortfalls back to the measurement date using the effective interest rate, and this accounts for the time value of money. A loss that occurs in year 3 is less severe in present value terms than a loss that occurs immediately. So, the practical implementation requires the discounting adjustments. Now, let's come up with the staging concept under the IFRS 9. This is one of the most tested topics in credit risk interviews, and for good reason. The staging mechanism is how IFRS 9 operationalizes the forward looking approach. Getting this right, and you will demonstrate the mastery level understanding. IFRS 9 uses a three stage model to classify financial assets based on credit risk. The stage determines which ECL calculation you use and how interest income is recognized. So, let me walk through each stage with practical clarity. Stage 1, the performing assets with no credit risk increase. A stage 1 asset is one where credit risk has not increased significantly since initial recognition. So, on the origination date, you have done your credit analysis, approved the loan, and the borrower is performing normally. They are making payments, no red flags, no significant deterioration in credit quality. This is stage 1. For stage 1 assets, you recognize the 12-month ECL as your impairment provision. So, why only 12 months? This is because credit quality hasn't deteriorated significantly. You are estimating losses from defaults that could occur within the next 12 months. And interest calculation is on gross carrying amount. You calculate interest on the full contractual amount without deducting the impairment allowance. And this makes sense because the asset is performing, you would expect to collect the full amount. The trigger to exit stage 1 is significant increase in credit risk, and this is critical. I'll explain in detail. Stage 2, which is performing assets with SICR. A stage 2 asset is one where credit risk has increased significantly since the initial recognition. But the asset isn't yet credit impaired. The borrower is still performing, they are paying their obligations on time, but something has changed. This is that their credit quality has deteriorated. So what constitutes a significant increase? This is where the judgment comes in, and it's definitely interview territory. IFRS 9 gives you two types of indicators, the quantitatives and the qualitatives. So, quantitative indicators are things like 30 basis points increase in probability of default since origination. If your PD went from 1% to 1.3%, that's a significant increase. Or if you have observed a specific numbers of days past due, many banks use 30 days past due as a quantitative threshold. Qualitative indicators, the next point, these are more subjective. Adverse changes in borrower circumstances, deterioration in collateral value, breach of financial covenants, adverse changes in the regulatory or economic environment affecting the borrower. So once you are in stage 2, you recognize the lifetime ECL. expected losses over the entire remaining life of the loan. This is a much higher provision than stage 1 because you are acknowledging the extended credit losses or the stress. And here the interest is calculated on the amortized cost net of impairment. So you are now deducting the impairment allowance before calculating the interest income. This reduces your reported interest revenue because you are essentially saying that credit quality is uncertain. I know this sounds a bit tough, so I would request you to pause the video, go back a little, and think about what we have discussed so far. The last stage is the credit impaired assets, a stage 3 asset with objective evidence of impairment. The borrower has defaulted or is in default. They have missed a payment beyond a certain threshold, commonly 90 days past due. So for stage 3 assets, you recognize the lifetime ECL, which is same as stage 2, but here the calculation is often more conservative and specific to the defaulted borrower situation. And interestingly, while you are providing the full lifetime ECL, the interest calculation here changes again, and the interest is calculated on the amortized cost net of impairment. So now let me bring this all together with the SICR concept because this is absolutely critical for interviews. In a summary, please listen. SICR is the mechanism that triggers the migration from stage 1 to stage 2, and you should think it as early warning system. You are watching for indicators that credit quality here is deteriorating materially even before the borrower actually defaults. And from practical implementation point of view, here how it works. Day 1, loan originates. Stage 1 with 12-month ECL. Month 3, borrower shows a bit of financial stress. PD increases by 25 basis points. Not yet significant, still in stage 1. Month 6, PD increases by another 30 basis point cumulatively. Combined with industry deterioration, this is likely the SICR component. So now migrate to stage 2 with lifetime ECL. Month 10, borrower misses a payment, say beyond 30, not 30, say beyond by 90 days. Objective evidence of impairment is observed here, so directly migrate to stage 3. The stages typically move in one direction, stage 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. But you can move backward. If a stage 2 borrower's situation improves, PD decreases, and SICR is no longer present here, they can move back to stage 1. This flexibility reflects the reality that credit quality isn't permanently determined. And here's something sophisticated that will that will impress the interviewer in the interview. Mention the rebuttable presumption. IFRS 9 says that there is a rebuttable presumption that if an asset is more than 30%, 30 days past due, it has experienced a SICR. This means banks can argue against the 30-day rule only if they have a good reason, but the burden is on them to demonstrate why. Most banks implement this practically. They automatically move stage 1 to assets to stage 2 at 30 days past due, and then they review for the exceptions. So now let me provide a complete integrated definition of IFRS 9 that pulls together everything that we have discussed so far. And this is your elevator pitch definition that you can deliver confidently in the interview. So IFRS 9 is the international financial reporting standard that governs the classification, measurement, and impairment of the financial assets and liabilities. It replaced the IAS 39 and became mandatory for financial periods beginning on or after January 1, 2018. But that's the technical definition. Let me give you the practical definition. IFRS 9 is the forward looking framework that requires financial institutions to recognize expected credit losses on day one rather than waiting for objective evidence of default. It does this through a three-stage model that progressively increases loss provisions as credit risk increases. So IFRS 9 sets rules for classification, that how you categorize the financial instrument, the measurement, how you value them, and impairment, how you estimate the losses. These three factors, the classification, measurement, and impairment. IFRS 9 applies to loans, debt securities, receivables, commitments, and guarantees. So essentially, any financial asset or liability that you hold on your balance sheet. And the fundamental purpose is to provide timely recognition of credit losses based on forward looking expectations, enabling better risk management and more transparent financial reporting. The key principles that underpin everything are the forward looking, that you use past events, current conditions, and forecasted futures to estimate the losses. Probability weighted feature. You consider multiple economic scenarios and weigh them by probability. Stage based provisioning. Your loss recognition increases as the credit risk increases from 12 months to lifetime ECL. Now, let me address something that frequently confuses the people: the difference between the IFRS 9 and the ECL model. IFRS 9 is the full standard covering the classification, measurement, impairment, and hedge accounting. But the ECL model is the impairment framework within the IFRS 9. So, ECL is a component of IFRS 9 and not synonymous with it. And now, here what makes IFRS 9 distinctive from other accounting standards. Most accounting standards are rule based. They say if X and then Y. But IFRS 9 is more principle based. It says you need to provide for expected losses based on your estimate, considering all the available information. And this gives institution more flexibility but also requires more judgment. And that's why you see much variation in how different banks implement the IFRS 9. Two banks with similar portfolios might use different macroeconomic scenarios, different PD estimation methodologies, or different SICR thresholds, but both could be compliant with IFRS 9. And this is why modelers like you are so valuable, that you are making principal judgments within the framework. So, let me address the scope more carefully because interviewers often test this. You know that the IFRS 9 applies to financial instruments and not real estate or other physical assets. It applies to assets you are measuring at amortized cost or fair value. It doesn't directly govern the credit exposures outside the balance sheet, like letters of credit or loan commitments. Also, IFRS 9 is mandatory for entities that follows the international financial reporting standards. Different jurisdictions have different rules, and some countries have adopted the IFRS 9 fully. Others use modified versions. The US, for example, uses the CECL model, the current expected credit loss, which is conceptually similar but has differences in detail. Japan has also similar standard, and this is why when you are interviewing at banks, you need to ask which standard they follow for their regulatory submissions and their financial statements. The principles are similar, but the technical details matter. And here's what you need to emphasize about IFRS 9 in your interview. It's not just an accounting change, it's a shift in how institutions think about credit risk. It requires building sophisticated modeling, infrastructure, and integrating the macroeconomic forecasting, implementing the governance framework, and changing the systems and processes. So banks that treat it as a compliance checkbox struggle with it constantly. But banks that have implemented the IFRS 9 effectively found it actually improved their risk management. So now let's talk about the IAS 39 versus IFRS 939. IFRS 9, sorry. So basically, this comparison is absolutely tested in interviews because understanding what changed and why demonstrates that you get this philosophy shift and not just the mechanics. So let us discuss this through each dimension of this comparison systematically. IAS 39 uses the incurred loss model, whereas IFRS 9 uses the expected credit loss model. IAS 39 only recognized losses when there was an objective evidence that a loss triggering event had occurred. But in IFRS 9, you estimate losses from day one based on the probability of future defaults and not actual defaults. In IFRS 9, you are provisioning for losses you expect even if they haven't happened yet. Whereas in IAS 39, you waited for default. A borrower could deteriorate gradually, their creditworthiness could decline, but if they hadn't missed a payment, you didn't provision. So the impact is dramatic. Under IAS 39, your loss recognition looked like a cliff. Normal times, minimal provisions, and then recession hits, default spike, and suddenly you have massive write offs. But under IFRS 9, you are smoothing the loss recognition. As credit quality deteriorates, provisions increase gradually, and so you are not shocked by sudden large losses. So let me illustrate this with a real scenario from financial crisis. Let's say a bank had a corporate loan book that looked fine through 2007, minimal provisions, but then in 2008 to 9, with the financial crisis, the default surge. Banks suddenly had to write off the 200, let's say $200 million in one quarter. Stock prices dipped, investors lost confidence, and the scenario became routine in 2008 to 9. And it's exactly what regulators wanted to prevent. But with IFRS 9, the same bank would have been increasing their provisions through that 2007 to 8 financial crisis as credit conditions deteriorated. By the time the credit losses materialized, provisions would already be elevated. The sudden losses would be smaller or non existent because the bank had already absorbed them through their provisions. So, here's how to discuss this in your interview. IS 39 incurred loss model created a lag between the credit quality and when losses were recognized. But IFRS 9 fixes this by recognizing the expected losses from inception. And this smooths the loss recognition and provides much earlier warning signals to stakeholders. One more point, some people ask whether IFRS 9 is overly conservative. So the answer is basically nuanced. IFRS 9 tends to result in higher provisions, especially in good times, when IS 39 would have minimal provisions in that time. But that's actually appropriate. You should be provisioning for risk even when they are not yet materialized. The test of IFRS 9 appropriateness isn't whether the provisions are high, it's whether the provisions track actual losses over time. So now IFRS 9 has three main pillars, and while we have focused on the impairment, the ECL model, that's what drives the credit risk interviews. So the pillar 1 talks about classification and measurement. This pillar determines how you classify the financial assets and liabilities and how you measure them subsequently. The classification framework asks what's your business model for this asset and what are the cash flow characteristics. Your business model is the strategic approach. So are you holding assets to collect the contractual cash flows? Is this point valid or not? Cash flow characteristics ask, are the contractual cash flows solely payments of principal and interest? SPPI means solely the payments of principal and interest. And if you fail the SPPI, the asset goes to FVPL, fair value of profit and loss, regardless of the business model. Pillar 2, the impairment, the ECL model. And this is where most of our time goes, and it's most relevant for credit risk score. So basically, this framework involves the three-stage classification based on credit risk changes, the 12-month ECL for stage 1, lifetime for stage 2 and 3, probability weighted scenarios, and the discounting with the regular updates. The discounting should be at the effective interest rate and regular updates at each reporting date. Pillar 3 is hedge accounting. This is about aligning the financial reporting with economic risk management. Also, if you have an interest rate risk and you hedge it with a derivative, hedge accounting allows you to defer gains and losses on the derivative. For credit risk goals, hedge accounting is less central unless you are working in treasury or asset liability management. So, how these three pillars work together? Classification determines how you initially recognize and measure an asset. As you hold it, the impairment determines what loss provisions you need to reflect. If you have hedged the asset or underlying, hedge accounting ensures the financial statements reflect your economic risk management strategy. Now let's get to the practical reality, what you will actually ask in the interviews. So I'm going to walk you through with the six of the most common questions on the topic IFRS 9 and show you how to structure the with confidence and impressive answers. So what is IFRS 9 and why was it introduced? We do have discussed this in detail. This is the foundational question and often asked early to gauge your baseline knowledge. You should start with the context that IFRS 9 is the international financial reporting standard that governs the reclassification, measurement, and impairment, and then talks about how it got replaced with IAS 39 in 2018. What was the requirement during the crisis? What happened to the provisions? And how IFRS 9 has solved this by requiring the forward looking provisioning from day one itself, and explain this by connecting all the dots. Next comes up the three stages under the IFRS 9, and this tests your understanding of the core mechanism. And you should start with the stage 1 clearly, where the 12-month of ECL is required. Why? You should explain that reason, and we do have discussed. So go back a little in this video and think of like what we have discussed so far. Stage 2 is for assets where credit risk has increased significantly, and that's your SICR threshold. Talk about SICR a bit in detail in your interview. And here you provide lifetime ECL. And stage 3 is for impaired assets, the objective evidence of default. Also the lifetime ECL. So talk about it a little, but most importantly, talk about the rebuttable presumptions as well that you can argue against it if you have the evidence. Also talk about from the qualitative perspective as well, that how you look at material adverse changes or any industry stress. The early warning this is valuable for both accounting and risk management. Now next is the what is the ECL formula and what does each component represent. This question basically tests your technical mastery. So don't just say that ECL equals to PD times LGD times EAD. Talk about a bit in detail what PD actually means, LGD actually means, and EAD. And also talk about the discounting factor, the time value of money concept. What exactly is SICR and what it is and why is it important? And this question itself tests your staging mechanism, your understanding regarding the staging mechanism. So talk about what how exactly moves the loans move from stage 1 to stage 2, why this assessment is important, and what kind of ECL is being measured at different stages. This is common question that interview test your staging mechanism understanding. How does IFRS 9 differs from IAS 39? So we do have discussed about the historical knowledge that why this was actually required, and we do have discussed the timeline as well. So try to explain that a bit in detail, the fundamental difference between these two guidelines, and also why what exactly the IFRS 9 has fixed when this regulation has come up, and what's the difference between 12-month and lifetime ECL. This again tests your understanding of staging. L- exactly the clarity, do you have that clarity of the rebuttable presumptions, what exactly the timelines being measured at different stages, and why the stage 2 migration is closely monitored, and what exactly is the role of provisions at each stage. So try to explain with confidence. So after answering, always wait for follow-ups because interviewers often ask you to apply these concepts to scenario. Always be ready with worked example and show that you understand these implementation challenges. This should demonstrate that you do have regulatory awareness. So all right, we have covered a lot of ground today, and from the origins of IFRS 9 in 2008 crisis through the three-stage model and the ECL formula as well. We also discuss how it differs from the legacy IAS 39 system, and now you have also have the foundational knowledge, and I hope that now you have the conversational ability as well to discuss the IFRS 9 confidently in your interviews. So here's what I want to take away from this. IFRS 9 isn't just accounting, it's a framework for thinking about the forward looking approach. When you walk in credit risk interview, you can articulate this distinction, explain how the PD, LGD, EAD interact, understand what SICR exactly means, and compare the IFRS 9 to IAS 39 thoughtfully. But knowledge is just foundation. To truly understand, I would recommend you to do few things. So first, practice these concepts with real examples. If you work with loan data, apply for staging framework and calculate PD. Think about LGD also with the different collateral types, and also get comfortable with the mechanics. Do always stay current on the regulatory guidance as well because IFRS 9 guidance evolves as bank implements and regulators provide the clarification. Thirdly, connect this to real bank practices. Read annual reports from banks in your target geography and see how they disclose ECL, how they are moved to stage 1 to stage 2, what macroeconomic scenarios are, and this real world grounding makes you credible. So, before you go, I would like your support. So, if you found this video helpful, I would like you to please like this video. This would help other professionals to find this content. Subscribe to Risk Modeling Hub if you want deep dives into the credit risk topics. Drop a comment below and let me know what aspects of IFRS 9 was most valuable for you, or what would you like me to cover next. Are you preparing for credit risk interviews? So, what's your biggest concern about IFRS 9? Your comments help me create content that most useful for your situation. And finally, share this with anyone preparing for the interviews. The more people building expertise in IFRS 9, the better the field becomes. And you all are elevating the standard of credit risk professionalism. So, thank you for spending time with me on Risk Modeling Hub. You are investing in your financial career, and that's valuable. So, keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video where we will go deep, even deeper into the credit risk modeling concepts. So, thank you. See you in the next one.